Once again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christina, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am the membership chair and also a member of the Board of Trustees. I'm also going to moderate this evening. I'm so excited for us to have kind of our first kind of Black History Month event. This tonight, we're going to be discussing some Jewish experiences of race. And I look forward to introducing you to several members. Everyone knows each other, but I think what's been great about this anti-racism discussion group is I've gotten to know people a lot more and in a deeper way. So I'm excited for people to kind of get to know each other in different ways. And so the person I'm actually going to introduce you to next is someone I have never had the honor to really get a chance to talk to and have had such great conversations with the last couple of months, and that is Jessie Ratner. So I'm going to pass it over to Jessie.
Hey everybody, thanks Christina. It's been really great getting to know you as well, and I see a lot of familiar faces, folks that are in the anti-racism group and other folks that I just know from Shereth Israel. It's really glad to see everybody. I wanted to give a little bit more context before we jump into more of the discussion. And I'll talk a little bit about myself later when everyone else does. So some more context. So back in March of last year, my friend and fellow congregant Stacy Passman and my wife, Teresa, have been talking about racism. So to reconstruct kind of what exactly happened, I asked Teresa about it because she has a better memory than I do. And she said she remembered it came up because Stacy and Teresa were talking about reading White Fragility. Stacy, you probably remember this better than I do. I wasn't there, but this book had been gaining a lot of attention, and we were both reading it. And so I think it had come up in conversation. About 2 months later, on May 25th, George Floyd was murdered. Teresa, as many of you know, is African American, and we have a daughter named Sarai, who was bat mitzvah at Shereth Israel. In our family, George Floyd's murder set off a really painful period of grief. I know a lot of you may share that experience. Personally, I wanted to find a way to do something that would address what I felt was my own nagging complicity in a system that caused his murder. And Teresa suggested in June that I reach out to Stacy, who was looking to organize an anti-racism discussion group. And so our first meeting was on July 12th. And over the course of the last 9 months or so, we've engaged with a range of readings: White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, Another Country by James Baldwin, and Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi, and some others. All very provocative books. And over that time, we've engaged in some really sensitive, important, sometimes mostly provocative conversations, with the readings functioning a bit like icebreakers. I think we've each been challenged. Sometimes to simply find the vocabulary to find a truly authentic way of talking about how the system of racism shapes our lives. For me anyway, so much more than I often realize, and how I uphold that system and how I might possibly interrupt it. In a New York Times article from 2019 entitled Anti-Racist Book List, Ibram X. Kendi wrote, "No one becomes, quote, not racist. Despite a tendency by Americans to identify ourselves that way, we can only strive to be, quote, anti-racist on a daily basis, to continually rededicate ourselves to the lifelong task of overcoming our country's racist heritage. We learn," Kendi said, "early the racist notion that white people have more because they are more, that people of color have less because they are less. I had internalized this worldview," this is Kendi writing, "by my high school graduation, seeing myself and my race as less than other people and blaming other Blacks for racial inequities. To build a nation of equal opportunity for everyone, we need to dismantle this spurious legacy of our common upbringing. And one of the best ways to do this is by reading books, not books that reinforce old ideas about who we think we are, or what we think America is, or what we think racism is. Instead, we need to read books that are difficult or unorthodox, that don't go down easily, books that force us to confront some of our own self-serving beliefs and make us aware that, quote, I'm not racist is a slogan of denial." So the anti-racism group has been kind of at one time both a book club and a discussion group, and a group interested in taking action. I've really enjoyed being part of the group, and one of the actions we've one of the first, larger actions, wider actions we're taking in the community is this event tonight. And so I hope that gives you a little more context and detail about the group. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to Rabbi Phelps.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for that excellent introduction, and thank you, Christina, for organizing this event. I just want to say a few words quickly. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers tonight, and I don't want to take away from their time. So I'm just going to offer a little bit of framing. What I really want to do is highlight the fact that anti-racism is a Jewish issue. And it's not just because racism and anti-Semitism are inextricably intertwined in the minds of white supremacists, which they are, and not just because anti-racism is a critical component of the Jewish project of tikkun olam, of repairing the world, which it is, but also because anti-racism has deep roots in our tradition, going all the way back to the Torah. There is a famous incident you may know of in the book of Numbers, as the Israelites are wandering through the wilderness, in which Miriam and Aaron call their brother Moses' leadership into question. They ultimately ask whether God speaks only through Moses, but their first complaint is about his wife. They exclaim, "He married a Cushite woman," seemingly referring to Moses' wife, Zipporah, whom he married while working as a shepherd in Midian. Most Jewish commentators, ancient and modern, have understood this exclamation to have racial overtones. Cush is the biblical word for Ethiopia. And while a Midianite priest's daughter certainly could be descended from Cushites, it seems more likely that Aaron and Miriam are referring to Zipporah's dark-skinned appearance than to her national origins. It is a chilling moment of bigotry from some of our most revered figures in Torah. And it does not go unpunished. In response to Miriam and Aaron's hurtful words, God strikes Miriam with tzora'at, a mysterious disease that turns her skin scaly and white. The fact that her skin is affected in this way is undoubtedly significant. Perhaps she had to feel what it was like to be excluded on the basis of her appearance, to be expelled from her camp and murmured about as an outsider in order to fully comprehend it. Her experience is also why Jews have come to associate tzora'at with lashon hara, with cruel speech. Our tradition teaches that words have great power, and that cruel words can manifest as painful physical realities. There are three key things that I take from this story. The first is that it is yet another illustration of how deep and pervasive and ancient a problem racism is, including within our own Jewish communities, ancient and contemporary. The second is that it is clear from this story that the Torah, and by extension, God, understands racism to be deplorable. We may reasonably quibble with the particulars of Miriam's punishment, not least because Aaron does not suffer the same punishment, but the fact that God sees fit to afflict her in this way shows that God understands the gravity of the problem. Lastly, this story serves as a reminder that Black Jews and other Jews of color have always been a part of our Jewish family, from Zipporah until today. Standing against racism means standing up for our own community, for ourselves. When any Jew or any human being suffers from racism, we are all diminished. And when we work to dismantle racism, we are all enriched. I hope tonight's discussion will help bring those truths to life for all of us and inspire us to get more deeply involved in the work of anti-racism.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Abby, for that. We so appreciate that. And it's just the perfect thing to segue into our actual discussion. So thank you so much. And with that, we're going to move into our conversation. And the folks that you're going to hear from tonight are Judie Wexler, Jesse Ratner, and also Stacy Passman. I'm so very excited to have all of them who have been very active in this work and educators. I've learned so much in the short time I've even been able to be on this conversation with them and going down this journey with them. And so we're going to start off with just, who are you all? And like I said, I've known many of them for many years, but I've learned so much in the last few months of working with them. So I'd love to start with actually with Stacy to tell us a little bit more about who you are, how long you've been a member, and why are you so passionate about this topic?
Well, I'm Stacy. I've been a member since my daughter was 5 months old, and she's 14 now, so it's about 14 years. And I would say that a lot of people who know me know I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, a place that does not have covenants or redlining, and was actually developed to be a very racially mixed place on purpose. And so I grew up in this kind of idealized childhood of a place where people were really mixed. Like I had an African American dentist who lived in a much fancier neighborhood than we did, and it didn't occur to me that that wasn't supposed to happen, like that he wasn't supposed to be as successful as he was, and he was amazing. And just it never occurred to me that redlining and all that other stuff happened in other places. It's really something that I've only become aware of recently, that if that's why the world is so segregated. And it's not that I didn't know that it's not that I didn't know that Black people had it bad. And it certainly is not something that I wasn't reminded of when I worked in a mostly Black office at one point. And the ladies there told me really clearly that I didn't know anything. Like that growing up in Columbia had left me kind of without skills that I could have had if I had grown up someplace else. I worked in a really interesting office where I had a token Black manager who was definitely hired just to have a Black figurehead. And he had this genius idea, one of his only genius ideas, to hire all Black managers for all the adult education programs across the state. And all of them were highly qualified. So you had this amazing, highly qualified staff and an unqualified manager to work there. And so all these ladies were amazing and didn't hesitate to school me at any chance they got. They were much older than me. Yeah, it was just an amazing experience. And I think that I've taken all of those lessons till today, and thinking about George Floyd, and even more for me than George Floyd, because I feel like George Floyd, it really comes from this, like, police are never going to be punished, and like so obvious that those people never thought they were. But then Breonna Taylor has really hit me, where you can just shoot someone wildly, make up anything you want about them, and then still go unpunished. And it looks like some of the people working who did that stuff to her will actually be punished. But I think it's just like that. It's been continual all summer. All these things have happened, and they've really hit me hard, all of them. And Derek Chauvin's face that he didn't think he'd ever be caught really has stuck with me a lot too. Or he never thought he'd be punished, and he didn't mind being filmed. Amazed me, and that you could just kill someone on camera and there'd be nothing done.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stacy, for that. Judie, I'd love to move to you next.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Judie. I've been a member of Sheriff Israel for about 40 years, which seems amazing to me, that 40 years have gone by. And what Rabbi Abby had to say about the Jewish relevance of this topic really struck home with me, because it's so much about when this topic became important to me. That, so I grew up in an entirely different community than Stacy did. I grew up in New York City, which on one hand is totally diverse, but the community that I grew up in was totally not diverse. New York City in my childhood was extremely segregated, not only by race, it was segregated by ethnicity, by religion, by just about every dimension that you could think of. And so my community was probably 98% Jewish, to the extent that there were some people in my elementary school who weren't Jewish, they pretended that they were, because everybody celebrated the Jewish holidays and everybody, shared that in common. So it was a very different kind of environment than what I live in now, or that probably most people grew up in. But my grandfather, my father's mother, who was an immigrant who came to the United States at age 13 and was a labor union organizer, and he was an organizer. When he retired, he became an organizer of senior citizens. But one of the things that he said was that for all the things that are wrong with the United States, the thing that was really right was that you could stand up anywhere and tell anybody what you thought was important and what was going wrong. And part of his teaching to me was that we all needed to be responsible to heal the world, that was that didn't make us a good person to do that. It made us a human being. And so as a human being, that was our responsibility. And that underlying any kind of discrimination, bigotry, prejudice was also anti-Semitism. And the Southern Poverty Law Center agrees with my grandfather on this. And they classify groups, groups of hatred, all kinds of dimensions. They don't include anti-Semitism. And when asked about it, they said it's because all of these groups are anti-Semitic. And so that we, as Jews, that a double kind of responsibility. So I have a PhD in sociology, and one of my areas of study when I got my PhD was what we then called race and ethnic relations. It's a long time ago. We don't call it the same thing anymore. And I taught undergraduate students about this for many, many years. For the last 28 years, I have been in administration, and I have been doing groups for faculty about how to incorporate this work and this understanding into their teaching, no matter what subject they teach, whether they were teaching undergraduate math, or they were teaching history, or they were teaching English. It didn't really matter, that this needed to be part of it. So I've been studying this for a long time. And with each year, there's new ways of thinking about it. And so it's been really important, for me to be part of this group and to have the opportunity to talk to a different set of people than I normally talk to about what racism is, what it means, how we address it, and to be part of this very ambitious reading agenda. And that, so I feel like I keep on learning new things, and that's absolutely essential to be able to confront and address this very important work. So that's who I am.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Judie. And then ending with Jesse. Who are you, and why did you create this amazing group?
Well, I didn't create it. Who am I? That's another question altogether. I can answer though. So I'm Jesse, as I mentioned. I've been a member of Shearith Israel since 2005, and I remember when my daughter Sarai was in the Baby and Me classes with Stacy's daughter Ayala, and they were calling around, and it's been a wonderful experience. I'm struck by how Judie and Stacy, we talk about our childhoods and how much they influence who we are today, and sort of all those ideas about a lot of things, obviously, but race in particular. And I think when you set up this discussion, Christina, and you asked us to think about how familiar are we with this topic, anti-racism, and where are we on our journey? And I started thinking about it and writing about it, and I think I've always been on this journey, and it hasn't always been called an anti-racism journey. It's always been a journey of the world is presented to me in one way. In reality, it's very different. And I think as a very young, definitely as an adolescent, I saw the stark discrepancy between my parents and my grandparents and their parents who had immigrated from Eastern Europe. My grandmother on my mother's side had changed her name from Levy to Gunn, spelled G-U-N-N. So when my mom divorced, I became an actual son of a gun, which I remain today. And how much they wanted to fit in. That I remember when I was a kid, we had a Christmas, not just a Christmas bush, we had a tree, like ornaments, tinsel, everything. And then we would go to my grandparents' house and maybe celebrate Passover. There was a deep appreciation in my childhood home for Black music, for Black creativity, but it was, and I had to see this over time. It was always conflated with the sense of something that wasn't fully real. I think I always felt like my dad, who loved Duke Ellington and loved Charlie Parker and loved Aretha Franklin, that later when I became an adult and I met my wife Teresa, who is many of you know is African American, and I mentioned in the intro, and I started to see actually the reality of what an experience of race is like for my wife. It really started to reveal the layers of racism that were not only in the broader society, which we all see all the time, and things like George Floyd's murder are just like a giant asteroid, hitting our country with the depth of how pervasive the racism is. But I remember my grandmother when I was young, and she would tell me to go get her a glass up in N-word heaven, which meant up at the top of the cabinet. And I didn't know what to do with that information. I didn't know how to, at the time as a kid, understand why would she say that? And I think all the ways in which race has been, whether it's subtle. And I think what I've learned through not just this group, but in a lot of ways, but also in this group, is that these topics are really difficult for mainly white people to talk about it, because we don't generally talk about race. We don't talk about whiteness. We don't talk about Blackness. I'll speak for myself, but one of the things I've learned in the group is really hard to stop, but not to make assumptions about what other people are thinking, believing, experiencing. But there is such a depth to this problem, and I think it's so tied to what Rabbi Abby was talking about, this this need to really repair, the sense that things are broken, that they're not right, and some of it is obvious, and some of it is very nuanced. And I've been continually impressed in the group we've had at the insights and just the intelligence and the fearlessness of people being willing to discuss tough things and to talk about not just the books and the ideas, which are important, but how I'm not finding ways to dismantle the racism that's all around us. I have the opportunity right now to work at Facebook for the last couple of months, and they are in some ways in sort of the center of a discussion, not just about politics, but about race. There's a lot of, now that I'm on the inside, talk about how do they improve the shadow banning that goes on Instagram and YouTube, where Black entertainers are often more harshly disciplined than for little reason than white content creators who are often much more virulently just awful. And so there's a lot of ways in which I feel that I can contribute, and I'm not such a higher up in Facebook to do too much, but I can do my part. And I think if this discussion group has been in any way helpful to allow some people in the community to talk about these issues in a more honest and authentic way, then I feel like it's been of some value. And so I'm really glad to have this conversation. I'll stop talking now and love to get into the discussion.
So that was actually the perfect segue. So our next conversation, the next thing we're going to talk about is just what have you, in the last 6 months, what have you all learned? Like, what is the, maybe 1 or 2 things that you didn't know before you started this journey, you learned in the course of this journey, or yeah, I'll leave it to those 2 questions, like your aha moments. And I'll let anyone who wants to go first.
So I think one of the things, we've read many, many books, and the one that is having the biggest impact on me is Stamped from the Beginning. And which is an enormous book. There's so much in it. So not just that it's thick, which it is, but that each page has a lot in it. And in that book, he talks about an assimilationist and a segregationist view, and why they both are fundamentally racist. The segregationist view is really easy to understand. And I think about all the things that I've taught over the years, it's all about what's wrong with that view. But the assimilationist view is much more complex. And some of the things that he brings up there are things that at a moment in time, I viewed as being a positive way to talk about race or to talk about, goals. And I think about my own parents who, coming out of an immigrant background, wanted to be 500% Americans. And all the ways in which they rejected aspects of, Jewish culture, and that we never recognized that was a way in which we were rejecting ourselves. And so that it's helped me kind of reflect back on some of the things that I might have said before this last year, and Kendi's books were being not racist, and recognizing the flaws in that argument. So it's really led me to kind of reassess a lot of what I saw in one way really had other kinds of levels of meaning. And I think it's the levels of meaning that have come out the most for me in our discussions. And in part because we've read so many things that it keeps on, it forces kind of going over, well, okay, how did I really think about that? Now, how did I think about that? So all these different perspectives are coming together in a way that's been very self-illuminating and challenging and offering growth.
I can build on that, Judie. I think I was also struck, and I'm not quite done with the Kendi book, Stamped from the Beginning, by the level of misinformation I have received over my lifetime about race. The fact that there was a so-called slave rebellion in the 17th century, which was driven by a Black slave who rallied poor whites to fight and try and overthrow the slaveholders, and they were violently suppressed. And that wasn't like just a rare occurrence. It happened all the time. And I think as a kid, I got this rosy picture that, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves and all was good after that. And not a lot of details beyond that. And I think one of the things I've learned from Kendi, he talks about this model where instead of what he felt was the model he'd grown up with, which was that people were ignorant and hateful, and it led to racist ideas, which led to discrimination. But what he points out and what he illustrates in talking about the Portuguese and how they really tried to market their slave capturing activities to get investments. They had Prince Henry in the 15th century. We learned this in Kendi, had a writer write about his journey to West Africa, and then they used that to pursue more investments in that business. And so Kenny's idea of the model is not you start with ignorance, you end up with racism and discrimination and discriminatory policies, but that you start with discrimination and you end up with ignorant people. And I think one of the things I've struggled with a bit with Kendi, and I think this is where for me, I try and take the more of the abstract kind of theoretical ideas and try and always kind of tie it back to how it works in my own life. He I think has a way of creating this spectrum, and Judie mentioned it, between the segregationists on one hand, the assimilationists, and the true anti-racist. He talks about when William Lloyd Garrison, who was the great abolitionist activist who advocated for, this was before the Civil War, before the Emancipation Proclamation, before Lincoln, he advocated for citizenship now, equality, later at some point, because he fundamentally felt like there was some standard of being of whiteness that Blacks didn't meet as a group. And I think, to Kenny's point, an anti-racist sees that as a racist proposition, that to color a whole group of people as inferior, that is the basis of racism. And I think, but I think, Kenny can be a little one or the other. Like, he talks about how folks are either, assimilationists or anti-racist. He talks about how, I'm looking at the W.E.B. Du Bois moves from an assimilationist position to an anti-racist position. And I wonder sometimes if it gets a little theoretical. And I guess I often want to tie it back to, in my own life, sort of the circles that I can affect. So at one level, maybe national or state, and having to do with elections, who can I vote for that's going to be an advocate for more inclusivity, more equity? I think at a more local level, I think about what happens in the high school that my daughter goes to, or what happens at Sherith Israel in terms of being more inclusive and more open and welcoming. And I think it is, not that it isn't, but I think one of the things I've learned in this group is, how do I take what I'm learning and really bring it back to what am I doing now? So I think about that a lot. I think about, that in the way, I interact with my wife. I think, I have, unfortunately, seen her experience really awful things. And, when it shouldn't have to be that it's your wife or your daughter or your family member for us to be profoundly saddened by how broken our system is. And, but it is, and that's just, I think, where we're at right now as a society, perhaps.
That's actually,
so.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, that's actually perfect way to transition to our next part. And I want to start with Stacy, because she leads social action, which is, what can we be doing? Like, what are you doing in your own life, or what are we doing as a community, or what should we be doing as a community? Because we are a Jewish community. We are Jews. I'm a Jew of color, and I want to, I want to every day feel like I'm welcome. And I know that you all revolve around that topic. Every single meeting, it's about, you're coming back to this, how can we be more welcoming, or just like what's going on with the school board right now, or, you know, there's so many different things that I think are where you all are going, and is where the action is, and so I'm going to pass it to Stacy to kind of like, let's talk a little bit about that action part. What do you see as how can we be welcoming?
Well, I think that we've started to talk about it between us, and I want to be a place that 20% of all Jews are people of color, and that's one of the reasons we've started this conversation. They're not a fringe group by any stretch. They are 20% is a good part of Judaism, are made up of people of color. And I think that it's time to just recognize that our congregations aren't going to be all white anymore, ever. And we shouldn't even strive for that. It's not something that we should even be talking about in any way, shape, or form. It's time to go past kind of our parents' congregations into the future. And I think about Shereth Israel, right? We do have a diverse population, but how can we be even more welcoming than we are today? Like, what are the things? And I think it's hard to think about what that might mean online, but I think that social action goes a long way to do that, not only through Hamotzi, which something that Nancy always calls our secret sauce, and I like to call our sauce. Nancy has created this amazing program that has social justice written all over it, has many people in the synagogue working on it, right? It's something that we all can do together, and it's something that we can all participate in any form that you want to. And I think that that goes for social action in general, that we have a ton of different things that we could be doing, including today. I thought to myself, like, why haven't we, just like Christina just mentioned, why haven't we weighed in on the fact that the schools are not open? Because from a social justice perspective, not just mine, I'm living at home with 3 children, it's a pretty outrageous notion that the school board has not opened up schools again. And it ends up being a social justice issue, because not only are we suffering, but all those kids who don't have a lot less than us and don't even have internet in their homes are also at home with their children. And we could be weighing in, and the congregation could have actually a huge effect on this subject if we wanted to weigh in on the topic.
Yeah, we've talked from the beginning of this group about what kind of social action we wanted to do, where all this reading and all this discussion would take us. And, it seems to me that there are 2 huge issues that are going on in our community right now, our San Francisco Bay Area community, that are directly relevant to this. One is what's going on with the schools, which is grossly highlighting inequity in education. And the other that is going on in health, so that as we've seen the pandemic expand out and hit various communities, and we've seen the vaccine rolled out, that we are seeing inequities in health in a stark relief that much more clearly than before. And I think both of those are areas that we, as a congregation and the Jewish community, can speak out on. The other thing that I've noticed within the group and in myself also, we keep on coming back to talking about Jews of color, and we say we want to do something about it, and then we move on. And I think we struggle to know what it is that we, how to understand what the issues are, what do we want to do about it. I have 4 grandsons, and they are all mixed race. And 2 of them are growing up in a Jewish community in which the norm is that everybody is mixed. That's the norm. That's actually the only Jewish community that they know. And when they visit here, I waffled between wanting to bring them to Shereth Israel and not wanting to bring them to share with Israel. When they went to Israel with their mom 2 years ago, I worried the whole time, were they going to come away from that experience with a sense of being an outsider that they don't have growing up in Beijing, which has a minuscule Jewish population. So, it's one of the things that I'm truly struggling to even understand how to articulate what it is that we should be considering and thinking and looking at. But I definitely think it's something that that we need to understand in a way that I don't think we do right now.
Thank you for that, Judie. And I know Jesse's gonna say something, and I wanna, before we go there, I just wanna say, I think what you said was really important for us to hit, which is, and I think even Stacy said this, I don't want it just to be our children, but it also starts with there. It starts there. It starts with us realizing that there are people out in our community who don't feel all the time welcome, and it breaks your heart. And, and even in this conversation and in this discussion group that we've been having, listening and seeing the inequities that we're seeing in the books that we're reading and the world that's outside our boxes that we live in. I think that is where the action and where the heart is, and also understanding our relationship to Judaism and Jews of color and where we fit. But I'm going to let Jesse talk.
Oh, I just wanted to add to a bit about what we could do in the community. I think there's something I've learned called trying to, centering oneself in centering. Christina, maybe you know this better than I do as being an expert in these types of groups. I know you've led this before. I'm trying to say there's this idea of centering in a Black experience, or centering a Black experience, or centering an Asian American experience. I think I got it. And I think there's something we can, all do, that I can do in my heart and in my interactions with folks in the congregation. And I think it takes something for many of us, like watching these murders happen, for us to believe, in a way. I'll speak for myself. I get the impression that from my family, from friends, that they want validation that the Black experience is one where you would fear the police. And so there have been instances that my wife has been a victim of police aggression, of police intolerance, of fear tactics. There was something that happened just a few months ago. There's something that happened a year ago. There's like so many instances where it's been the case that it's been a scary interaction. And I know that to be true. But I feel like as a society, we've needed to see these things to verify that, oh yeah, this is really happening, when in fact it's been happening the whole time. And it still happens. And I think there's something about wanting to verify the brutality of our system that I think, for me, I don't trust institutions because of it. I don't trust my employer. And I think it goes back a little bit to Kenny's idea that it's people that can create the discrimination, the discriminatory policies that I'm really angry at. Like I'm really upset and want to find a way to dismantle that system, because it's the system that perpetuates this idea that white is normal and there's no racism. And I think as the society, there's more of a consciousness of it. There's this wake to be woke, so to speak. when in fact it's all right there and in front of us all the time. And I feel like the more I can stay in touch with that, the more I can stay in touch with that when I'm in the community with folks, the more I can bring more openness into my daily relationships is really a huge stride. And having conversations like this and having our group and having other people just talk about what we're talking about these ideas, because there's in such currency. They're a little bit off the front page compared to this summer, white fragility and how to be an anti-racist for the bestseller lists. The awareness seems to wane, but the reality has never been, it's always been present. And I think that's the thing that both pains me the most, and also is the thing I want to work personally toward being more aware of, and being more open to how do I dismantle those systems that perpetuate racism.
It's a perfect way for us to frame our conversation and move into our last part. But I think it's important to understand, and thank you, Nancy, for putting that in the chat of what you said. But it's also something I say all the time in my work is being uncomfortable, being uncomfortable. This work and the things that you all were talking about and you all talk about over and over again in the group is there's an uncomfortableness in it, but you sit in it and you learn from it. And I'll say, something I also say all the time is I'm Black every day. It doesn't get to be something that I can hide. It doesn't get to be something that I can walk into the synagogue and leave. I'm always Black. And so the experiences that we have every day, if you can center and understand what it's like to be that person, not discounting the Jewishness of all of us and the richness of that. And so I appreciate how you all have framed your conversations in that way in the last couple of months of me being in that group. So I appreciate it. As we move into our last part, something else Jesse said was really important, and that is saying that this is, while everyone else we were worried, like, what do? We don't want to lose this. We don't want to lose this momentum. We're not losing it. As a congregation, as a membership committee, as social action, as the anti-racism discussion group, this is the first of many conversations that we plan on having. And to that end, we want to have we're going to put up a poll right now, and it's, what are you interested in learning more about? Because this is, as we said, the first part of our journey. We're continuing our journey. We're having this journey. And so we would appreciate if you can just give us what you want to learn more about. Give everybody a couple seconds. It should have popped up on your screen.
I'm seeing the results coming in.
Thank you, Peter. This doesn't mean that we don't want to talk about all of it, because let's say we're all nerds. We all want to talk about all of this stuff. You're all here tonight, right? So we're going to thank you all so much. This poll will help us to, and you can also stop sharing that by just, I think it'll go away from your screen when you just hit the X, just in case you didn't know. Some people, I always forget. So as we move into our last bit, I also want to thank the folks. I said, let's do this amazing event. Who will come and hang out with me for an hour and talk in front of the congregation? And these folks raised their hand within like 24 hours, maybe 12. So thank you so much, Judie. Thanks you so much, Jesse, and thank you so much, Stacy, for being being brave. I think a lot of people would thought we were going to have a very different discussion, but I think it's important for us to look at ourselves first before we go out into the community and start asking Jews of color a lot of questions. So I appreciate your willingness to do that. So as we have a few minutes left, we wanted to open it up to questions, and it can be for any member of our panel. So please share in the chat. A couple minutes.
Oh, sure.
And if we don't have any questions, we can always end with what do you want people to know? What do you want people to know about what you've learned in the last year? Or, I think it's just a different version of the first question, but it's really just what do you want people to know about the group? Oh, we've got one. Hold on. We've got a question, and it's a good one. It's the one we've been talking about the most. So, school board, yay. It's so funny, Ellen, that you bring that up, because that was definitely the conversation. So I will let other people talk about.
I just want to ask Ellen the question. Are you talking about the renaming in particular?
No, I'm talking about the combination of the renaming and the Lowell High School.
Mm.
And
Interesting.
they have
Okay.
triggered me to the point where I'm yelling at David all the time. And we spent hours writing a letter to the editor of the Chronicle.
I don't think you're alone.
Nope.
I think it has been very triggering, and I don't think that you're alone. And I think that London Breed said, I had watched the press conference. She said, we really missed a teaching moment. We could have actually done the whole renaming with the kids.
Well, of course, there's all
and had a better conversation about
there.
it.
We live a block from Diane Feinstein's school. Our neighbor's kid goes there. She was a Jewish woman, etc., etc., etc. One of our role models. So there's that. The Lowell High School thing even more, and maybe some other time I can talk to Judie about it, like in serious detail. As I was talking to David earlier today, I was saying, it's like education, there's like this continuum of what is taught, as opposed to talking about excellence and elite and stuff like that. And Lowell teaches a group of kids who maybe there's only 30 of them in the city of San Francisco at a certain level. And if they take that away, those kids will have no place to be, in the same way the Black kids have no place to be at a good level, and so on and so forth. It's a little hard to go into all the details of it now. But
so it's kind of the renaming thing is, someone called it performative anti-racism. It's kind of a performance art
right.
And I think that we need to.
I think of it as like the Cultural Revolution. They're chopping down the history the way they did in China, and pretending it didn't exist. And like London Breed said, and I didn't happen to see it, but about making it a teachable moment and, putting some nuance into what they did.
So, Ellen, you're raising really, really important and complicated questions.
Really complicated.
And, looking at the poll results really quickly, school equity, inequity is the one that came out first. And so I think that we need to think about how we can, address that in conversation, because it's that the schools are closed, that, and the renaming and Lowell High School. I mean, all of these things are happening at the same time. And really thinking through what is, and understanding what's going to be best for a whole generation of children who right now are suffering from being home and not being in school. So thank you for raising the question, because I think it is in many ways one of the most important ones for us to address right now. And I think we need to think about how we set up some future conversations to do it.
And I was just right. I think that I see that David and Makiko are answering in the chat, and I do think that what excellence is could be discussed, and we could even discuss. I think that it's up for grabs about what is an actual meritocracy, and why are only some people beneficiaries of that, and other people are not.
No. And I think that's the point of the conversation that we've been having, which is, I think that the conversation is bigger, and we keep having that. I think the thing that we notice over and over again as well in this in the learnings that we've had is that these all keep happening over and over and over again, because we never get to the root of the problem, or we never get to actually having the conversation. And we can all have these conversations as a group, but are we going to these school board meetings? Are we finding out what's going on in our backyard and what we're doing? And to someone else's point in the chat, what about the people who aren't those 30 kids? There are all these other pieces to the conversation and the puzzle that I hope don't move people away from anti-racism. I hope it moves you closer to helping to think about that it's not just about one group of people. And I think that we even noticed that in our anti-racism discussion group, is that when we start to pit one group against each other, nothing gets done. And everyone is saying, what about me? And I think that's part of the anti-racism work, is it's not about us. We've got to figure out how to take ourselves out of the conversation and actually help others. So, hi, Nia.
I was reading David's chat, and this reminds me of something you just said. So David, he said, how can we understand other people's experience if we don't have the opportunity to meet them where we are, and how do we avoid forcing people to be explainers? And I don't know if I'm going to say I disagree with you, Christina, but you made a comment that I actually wanted to ask the panelists. That one thing I know that helps me is when I look at an experience where I have felt uncomfortable. For those of you who do or don't know, my dad is African American and my mom's Jewish, so I am a Jew of color. But taking that out, I think about, when I'm at the synagogue or wherever, where is a time where I have felt excluded? And it could be any form of exclusion. For right now, we could take race out of it, but any form of exclusion. And I'm curious how the panelists have ever felt excluded, and it could be at the synagogue or it could just be anywhere. And does that experience, can it help you, or has it helped you be more empathetic to other people? And is that a way that perhaps you could look at people of color and Jews of color?
It's a great question. It was actually on my list. Nia, get out of my head. So this will be our final question. It's a great question, and don't ever think that the whole point is to have a conversation. So you can disagree with me all you want, my friend.
I could go first. I think about this time I was 14. I was on this baseball team. I was playing Little League Baseball. I thought I was a really good player. I had what I thought was the highest batting average. And I remember 3 or 4 kids from each team got to make the All-Star team. And I didn't make it. And I had been on All-Star teams before, and for whatever reason, I didn't make it. And I remember crying in the car afterwards when I learned. And it was one of the last times I remember just bawling in front of my father. I felt really excluded. I felt so bad. I wanted so badly to be part of that group. But I don't think I learned my lesson. I think the lesson is that it's really hard. Racism is such a blob it's so many things that I think I just need to be continually more of a student and more of someone who's open to not being a jerk to people who I don't know, and making assumptions about people I don't know as a group or not. But I think it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge to do the things, the mitzvot that actually are helpful. And I don't think I'm ever perfect. And I think that's okay too. I think maybe that gets to Judie, what you suggested about justices, and there's something that makes us a good person. It just makes us human. That's kind of how I think about it.
So I started graduate school at Berkeley in 1968. And in the sociology department, we were the first class in which they accepted more than one woman. Before that, it was one woman each year. And there were 5 of us. And still very much a minority. And every time one of us said something, the men would go on as though we hadn't said anything and frequently repeated what we said and would get praise for it. So part of my graduate school experience was very much about feeling excluded, like invisible. So I still carry with me the emotional impact of that. While I've studied racism for all these years, it's up here. It's not here. And I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I had an African-American man working for me. He's a very large man. He was 6'6", and dark-skinned. And I was in the middle of a meeting and 2 African-American women on the faculty came running into my office and they said, Judie, you have to come downstairs right now because this man has been stopped by the police and we're afraid about what's going to happen. And so I got up and I left my office and I went down with them. And I know about driving while Black. I know all of the data. And it was somebody I cared about. So I cared, but the palpable fear that was just rolling off these 2 women and what I was experiencing was different. It was different. I still was there in a somewhat intellectual place, not the same way in a gut clenching. It just was different. And yes, it was important that I was there. And if I wasn't there, I really don't know what would have happened. But I don't know how we get to that emotional understanding. It's one of the reasons that I was really glad that we read James Baldwin's book. And it's one of the things that fiction and movies help me with, is to get more deeply into the experience, so that the understanding, so that it's not just intellectual, but it's also somatic and it's emotional and it's it's more complex and more complete. And that's the only way I know how to do that. But it's not the same. I mean, you can't totally get into somebody else's experience that they've carried with them every day of their lives. You can't. You can get closer than we have been. And I think it's absolutely essential for us to work at getting closer and to sit with the discomfort of feeling that emotionally and somatically. Mm. In some ways, it's easier to understand it intellectually. And academics, I'm really good at understanding things intellectually.
It's funny you say that, because it actually, I can read things better than I can. So the books are good for me. I have to be emotionally ready for the movies. I can't watch them without having a visceral reaction and having so I react the same way that you do, but I have to do it in the backwards way because I can't feel that emotion, because it really, I have to build up to it. So it's very interesting. But Stacy, I'll let you go, and then we've been over time, but thank you all for hanging out with us for a few extra minutes. But Stacy, go for it.
I'm thinking about all the books that I've read even before this group, and thinking about Toni Morrison's books and how that even Black people, even Toni Morrison was asking the question in Beloved about this experience of what has slavery done to us? How has it harmed us? Even kind of talking and now thinking about it, and kind of in the words of 2020 and 2021, like, how is it genetically a part of me? Like, how did we pass it down the way that Jews pass down like this anxiety that I call anxiousicism? Right, it's a belief in anxiety, and it's that same thing, like, and I just think about that and how we've been, these are huge topics, right? Why was Toni Morrison writing Beloved? To heal herself from this thing that she felt that she had inherited, and she was giving it to us and in a way she didn't know she was doing this, but she was healing us in a way from the same thing that she was healing herself from by writing the book. And I think that that's something to take away, and maybe, and that leads to the next thing that we're going to do, and that Christina wanted to talk about, is that we're going to do a smaller group, another group. It can be but more of a bite-sized, I'll call it a bite-sized thing. We're going to read Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, from the inauguration. And then by the time we have this, which is going to be on March 3rd at 7 p.m., we're going to also have her Super Bowl poem. So we will probably read both. So we can hear, we can read both of Amanda Gorman's poems and talk about what she talks about in them. And I think that her poems are really good because they're not like the wheelbarrow one where they're very theoretical and you have to have this whole picture in your head. She actually points to a lot of things and brings up the Bible and has a biblical thing in it and has all those, she's very literal. And I think that that's good too. And I'm really excited about reading her poem again. And the kids actually read it. I went over it again the other day with my son because they were reading it in class, and that made me really happy.
Awesome. So yes, it was great. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because Stacy and I were working on that today, trying to get that set up so that those of you who don't want to read the 500-page book that we were reading right now, which is excellent. I can't stress enough how amazing Stamped from the Beginning really has been. But if you just want a bite size, please join us for this, for the event. We also, to Ellen's point and to many of your other points in the chat, we're not letting go of this other issue. We're not going to act like it didn't exist, and we're not going to act like we don't need to talk about it. So it will, that's one of the reasons why we asked for that poll, because this is a first step on our journey. And we are going to find things, and we are going to talk about real issues and try and make real change. That is something that's very important to this group. And I really, I really want you to know that, like, we're not going to leave this on the table and say we're not going to go anywhere else. I do want to bring up one last thing, which is something that Makiko actually said on Monday, which is that every conversation I've had in the last 3 days has had some conversation around, which is, what is the Jewish table? Who are we? And I really want to leave you all with, who are we? Who do we want to be going forward? How can you invite more people to your Jewish table and be a little uncomfortable, but be comfortable being there and understanding that we're going to get there and we're going to figure it out. But there's going to be some action behind it too. I'm so pleased, and thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We were all like, please, people show up, and you did. So I want to thank you all again for joining us this evening, and know we're on our first part of our journey.
And thank you, Christina.
Thanks, Christina.
Yes.
Thank you, Christina.